You've seen the 7-Eleven logo countless times, but there's something slightly off about it that most people never spot. Once you notice it, you can't unsee it. The odd detail looks like a mistake, yet it might be one of the reasons the brand feels so familiar and recognizable. And here's where it gets stranger. By 2025, 7-Eleven operates over 85,000 stores worldwide and is still aggressively expanding. What could a design quirk and a risky business pivot have in common? Once we look closer at that logo, the answer starts to explain everything. The logo that breaks the rules. If you take a moment to really look at the 7-Eleven logo, you'll notice something unusual. The word 11 is written in sturdy capital letters, except for the final N, which is lowercase. It seems out of place, almost like a mistake. But it was. The detail actually came from a deliberate choice. John P. Thompson S.R.'s wife suggested softening the logo by ending with a lowercase letter, believing it gave the design a friendlier feel. That small change survived year after year, until it became an inseparable part of the brand's look. Designers usually prize balance and order in logos. Most iconic brands lean into perfect symmetry or carefully aligned proportions because our brains naturally like consistency. 7-Eleven ignored those instincts. Instead of neat uniformity, it left a tiny irregularity built into its identity. And the strange part, that's what people remember. Psychologists have shown that irregular details stick in memory more effectively than uniform patterns. In other words, the lowercase n isn't a flaw at all. It works precisely because it breaks many of the rules designers usually treat as sacred. Imagine if the N were capitalized to match the rest of the word. The logo would feel colder, stiffer, and interchangeable with countless mid-century brands. Instead, the softer letter makes it approachable, almost hinting at handwritten warmth tucked into a rigid corporate mark. That single character shifts the tone of the entire design, guiding how people feel about the store before they even walk inside. Over time, repetition reinforces that effect. Once the logo is seen thousands of times, the odd letter no longer feels strange, it feels right. It becomes the familiar face you spot among a crowd, recognizable precisely because of its imperfection. And crucially, 7-Eleven never tried to fix it. They kept the identity consistent while so many other companies stumbled in redesigns. That unwillingness to smooth away every quirk is powerful. Other brands have learned the hard way what happens when they tamper with visual identity. Gap updated its logo in 2010, and the backlash forced a reversal in a matter of days. Tropicana redesigned its packaging so dramatically that sales plunged 20% in just a few weeks. Customers weren't rejecting the new designs because they were bad in isolation. They rejected them because they disrupted familiarity. By holding on to its lowercase n, 7-Eleven didn't just preserve consistency, it created loyalty through recognition. The psychology behind it is simple. Our brains flag unusual details as worth remembering. If everything looks predictable, it fades into the background. But introduce a small disruption, like a lowercase letter in an otherwise uppercase word, and suddenly you've got a mental hook. This explains why the supposed imperfection in the logo strengthens recall. The very detail that looks wrong is the one that secures its place in memory. The impact goes even further than design. This mindset, treating bold irregularity as a strength, shows up in how 7-Eleven has operated for decades. Just as the logo stands out by breaking expectation, the company built its business by ignoring retail conventions. Stores stayed open when others closed. Shelves stocked goods you didn't expect at a small ice dock. Even in later years, major structural changes shifted the company in unorthodox directions. Repeatedly, what might have looked like risky or even awkward moves turned into defining advantages. There's also a cultural angle to the logo's survival. In the early 20th century, design movements revolved around strict geometry and modernist order. Every shape was clean, squared, and deliberate. A stray lowercase letter would have clashed with that ideal. Yet 7-Eleven kept it, proving that what mattered wasn't geometric precision, but recognizability from across a busy street. The imperfection was easier to see, easier to process at a glance, and therefore more useful in advertising than some polished but sterile design. Think of how children remember details about characters, maybe a crooked grin or a mismatched feature. The lowercase n does the same thing for adults scanning storefronts. It adds a subtle quirk that sets it apart, planting itself in memory without conscious effort. That's why branding experts today call it a distinctive mark rather than a mistake. Nearly a century later, the enduring presence of that lowercase letter proves its value. You'll still find it glowing in neon signs from Tokyo to Dallas, printed on coffee cups, snack wrappers, and storefront windows. It no longer feels peculiar because it has become the signature of a massive global retailer. And while designers may nitpick its visual imbalance, the fact remains, few logos have demonstrated such staying power. Today, with over 85,000 stores worldwide, the scale of 7-Eleven's reach only underlines how effective its branding has been. The lowercase n isn't just a typographic quirk. It reflects a deeper attitude that often guided the brand's greatest breakthroughs, a willingness to disregard conventions when those conventions stand in the way of customer connection. Over and over across its history, what looked like an error or a gamble ended up reshaping how the company grew. That broader theme begins to appear when you move away from the sign outside and toward the business itself. Because long before the 7-Eleven name ever existed, the company behind it was making decisions that seemed offbeat, even careless, yet turned out to reshape an entire industry. And the earliest story doesn't revolve around branding or logos at all. It starts with something far more ordinary. From ice blocks to midnight errands. In 1927, a small Dallas-based company called Southland Ice was focused on one thing: selling large blocks of ice to households that relied on iceboxes to keep food fresh. There was nothing glamorous about the business. Customers would pull up in wagons or trucks, load heavy blocks, and head home to preserve their milk or meat for another day. At the time, this seemed routine. Grocery stores handled food, dairies handled milk, and ice plants handled ice. No one saw Southland as anything more than a supplier in a rigid system. But on the ground, something different was beginning to take shape. One employee, John Jefferson Uncle Johnny Green, noticed what executives did not. Working day to day around the ice house, he heard customers talk about groceries they had forgotten: milk, bread, eggs, things they couldn't buy at night because stores closed early. In the 1920s, this was just accepted reality. If you needed something after hours, you waited until morning. Ice companies weren't supposed to solve that problem. But Uncle Johnny saw a simple opportunity hiding in plain sight. People were already at the counter for ice. Why not give them the other basics they were asking for? Uncle Johnny didn't keep the observation to himself. He brought it to Joe C. Thompson SR, who was helping lead Southland at the time. Instead of dismissing the suggestion as unrealistic or distracting from the real business, Thompson supported the experiment. The idea blurred the lines between industries, but shelves at the ice houses soon carried more than frozen blocks. Alongside them appeared milk, bread, and eggs, the most common things people found themselves without late at night. That combination of products didn't just extend sales. It met an urgent need in a way no other business was willing to. This moment wasn't the result of corporate research or industry trend reports. It was observation translated into action. Green provided the spark, and Thompson had the willingness to try something unconventional. That pairing, humble frontline insight combined with leadership support, transformed the company's trajectory. Southland Ice was no longer just another supplier of frozen water. Almost by accident, it became the first business to function as what we now call a convenience store. The difference between the old model and the new one was stark. Ice sales were seasonal and entirely dependent on a single product. Families bought what they needed, but once refrigerators became affordable, demand would inevitably collapse. By introducing staples, Southland discovered something more resilient. People always forgot the milk, always ran out of bread, always needed a last-minute purchase. Instead of waiting until the next day, they could now take care of those needs in the same stop. The focus shifted from ice to convenience itself. Customers embraced it immediately. Families appreciated the flexibility of buying essentials late in the evening, and demand grew beyond the original experiment. Shelves expanded from just a few perishables into an assortment of small groceries. Each edition reinforced the same insight. People valued time and accessibility over rigid retail categories. What mattered wasn't whether they were at a grocery store or an ice plant, it was whether they could solve their problem quickly. That seemingly small pivot carried cultural weight. In the 1920s, the rhythm of shopping was dictated by store hours. If your local grocer shut its doors at 6, your household went without until morning. Southland broke the pattern. By staying open later and stocking needed goods, it showed customers that life didn't have to be organized around everyone else's schedule. The late-night purchase, once impossible, was suddenly an option. For everyday families, that shift was transformative. The operational work behind this change should not be underestimated. Adding perishable goods like milk and bread required refrigeration, organization, and reliable supply partnerships. But those logistical hurdles were worth it because they turned ice houses into neighborhood stops. What had been a plain industrial site became a local resource, a place families integrated into daily routines. Without ever planning to, Southland had stumbled into a new kind of business logic. The value of convenience outweighed tradition. Historians now point to this decision, the moment Uncle Johnny's idea was greenlit. as the practical beginning of the global convenience store industry. The brand did not yet carry the 7-Eleven name and had no stripes or neon signage, but the core identity was already forming. It was no longer about supplying one commodity. It was about solving whatever a customer needed at the moment they needed it. That mindset resonated in 1927, and it still defines the company nearly a century later. The legacy of that experiment is easy to measure today. What began inside a single Southland Ice location evolved into a retail category, operating over 85,000 stores worldwide by 2025. From a few cartons of milk and loaves of bread stacked next to ice, the model scaled into an international standard for accessibility. It's staggering to think that a global giant was built out of such a modest change, but that is exactly why the story matters. The convenience store didn't come from corporate vision or years of planning. It came from one employee listening to customers and a leader willing to take a risk. That dynamic became part of the company's DNA, showing up over and over again in later decades. Sometimes the choices looked odd or even impractical at first, but they proved decisive once people actually experienced them. As Southland grew through the 1930s and beyond, that willingness to try unconventional ideas didn't disappear. It showed up in ways that might look surprising, even bizarre, through the lens of modern retail. Some of those decisions became forgotten chapters of the brand's history, but they reveal how experimentation quietly shaped what 7-Eleven would eventually become. The Totem store era nobody remembers. When people picture 7-Eleven today, they think of bold stripes in orange, green, and red, glowing signage, and a logo etched into memory. But if you step back into the 1930s, you would have found something that looked almost nothing like that. At the time, these stores weren't called 7-Eleven at all. They were known as totem stores, with wooden totem poles standing outside as their most striking feature. The poles weren't chosen because they connected logically to ice or groceries. They worked because they caught the eye, and the name carried a clever double meaning. Customers could totem home. Even before flashy neon branding, the company had figured out how to advertise its new shopping idea with something simple, cheap, and impossible to miss. This was an era long before national branding campaigns or polished logos. Most businesses depended on repetition and whatever storefront presence they could create. For Southland Ice, which had only recently started dabbling in grocery staples alongside ice, the totem image gave them a way to stand out. Seeing a totem pole on a Dallas street corner instantly signaled something different. Unlike the serious grocers and markets of the 1920s and early 30s, Totem conveyed its identity with a symbol that blended playfulness with memorability. It was affordable, unconventional, and surprisingly effective against a backdrop of generic storefronts. The tactic wasn't just surface level. It aligned with the company's new promise: small, quick purchases that could be carried home without the bulk of traditional grocery shopping. In the shorthand of the name itself, the brand was teaching people the behavior of totem shopping. By design or by luck, the playful gimmick managed to express the company's purpose better than a serious corporate name might have. By 1928, Southland had already expanded beyond ice and groceries into selling gasoline, adding another layer of everyday necessity to the model. The company's willingness to explore small but bold shifts kept them current and gave them consistent opportunities to draw in new types of customers. But none of those experiments would shield them from the larger crisis that soon arrived. The Great Depression slammed into American life after 1929, and by 1931, the impact was immediate across small businesses. Families who once added extras to their shopping lists began holding off on everything non-essential. Ice sales slowed, milk and bread purchases tightened, and Southland's retail experiment faced the same strain that was crushing companies nationwide. Whatever advantage the Totem branding provided in good times, it couldn't counteract the fact that people now had less money to spend and fewer trips to make. Locations struggled to hold on, and survival became uncertain. The turning point came in 1933 with the repeal of Prohibition. Suddenly, entire categories of products that had been illegal for over a decade, beer, wine, and liquor, returned almost overnight. This wasn't just a symbolic change. It opened a flood of demand for beverages that people had been waiting years to buy freely again. And convenience shops like Totem were positioned to serve that market almost instantly. Shelves that had once held little more than bread and milk could now stock consumer favorites that attracted foot traffic in a way staples alone could not. That change didn't just lift sales out of the Depression-era slump, it reshaped what the stores were. Alcohol gave them a cultural relevance beyond practicality. They became more than a fallback stop for families who had run out of bread. They became hubs where people could pick up goods that carried enjoyment and social value. It was a substantial pivot, one that confirmed that Southland's retail arm wasn't just a passing experiment. Totem was becoming a dependable stop for almost any daily need. The marriage of unconventional branding and practical adaptation gave the company resilience during a decade when thousands of businesses folded. The goofy wooden poles may look anachronistic today, but they were enough to differentiate, while smart product expansions provided the substance. The lesson was straightforward. Attention alone isn't enough to survive, but visual hooks combined with a willingness to follow demand can form a lasting business. By the mid-1940s, the company was ready to update its identity again, and the Totem era faded. In 1946, the chain officially adopted the name 7-Eleven, a description of its hours, 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., longer than nearly any competitor at the time. The new name cast off the playful imagery of carved poles in favor of a clean promise about open doors. It was direct, functional branding, but it also captured the theme that had defined the company since Uncle Johnny's first shelves of milk, being there when people needed something most. Looking back, the Totem Stores era is mostly forgotten outside of company history, but in context, it was a critical bridge. It showed the value of unusual branding. It carried the business through the Depression by leaning on consumer demand after Prohibition ended, and it set the stage for the transition to 7-Eleven. Without that formative decade, the later brand might not have found footing at all. And while the Totem concept worked for its moment, the new name brought something even more powerful into focus. By explicitly promising extended hours, the stores tied themselves to time rather than gimmicks. That focus on availability, when others were closed, would soon push the company into an unplanned experiment that altered the future not only of 7-Eleven, but of retail as a whole. The revolutionary 24/7 gamble. Nobody at 7-Eleven ever started with a grand plan to invent round-the-clock shopping. The idea that would come to define the company across the globe began almost by accident. In the 1940s, 7-Eleven stores still kept ordinary hours, closing in the evenings the same way their competitors did. But one night, near a stadium in Dallas, that routine was interrupted. A wave of football fans poured out of a game late in the evening and headed toward a local store looking for drinks and snacks. Instead of shutting the doors and sending them away, the staff simply kept serving. Customers kept arriving, registers kept ringing, and management noticed something unusual. A single night of bending the rules hinted at a completely new way of running the business. Would you stay open if no one paid you for the extra hour? That was effectively the question the company now faced. At first, the risks felt obvious. Paying employees to stand behind a counter during the dead of night seemed unsustainable. Electricity and security cost money, and late-night hours rarely promised heavy traffic. For decades, American retailers had taught customers to shop according to store schedules. Grocery stores shut their doors before dinner, department stores closed early, and if you ran short of coffee or diapers after hours, waiting until morning was the only option. In that context, the idea of keeping a small store open all night looked impractical. But the more the team tested it, the more the pattern surprised them. Even if the flow of customers wasn't overwhelming, it was steady. And just as important, people remembered where they could turn when everyone else was closed. Eventually, this proved more valuable than simply calculating profit per hour. By the early 1960s, the experiment began to formalize. Stores in select markets tested continuous schedules, and by 1963, several pilot locations were operating 24 hours a day. This was no longer a spontaneous choice by a clerk slipping past closing. It was an intentional business model. Some nights brought only a handful of customers, but the consistency of availability built loyalty. Workers finishing factory shifts, college students studying late, travelers arriving on delayed trains, all of them began treating the store as a guarantee. The margins from each hour hardly mattered when compared with the psychological power of being reliable at any time. By staying open when others shut their doors, 7-Eleven was building a reputation stronger than any advertisement. The timing could not have been better. Post-war America was shifting its rhythms. Growing suburbs produced commuters returning late from downtown jobs. Families needed last-minute milk or medicine after kids were in bed. Service industry employees worked irregular schedules, and hospitals, airports, and factories never shut down. A store open all night became more than a novelty, it was a necessity. Customers adapted quickly, letting go of the rigid chore-like planning that earlier decades had required. Instead, they embraced the comfort of knowing they could shop when it suited them. That shift sounds minor, but at the time it was a cultural step change. Purchasing was no longer limited by the clock. In 1966, a new product sealed the connection between around-the-clock availability and cultural identity, the Slurpee. sold straight from the machines in brightly colored cups, it gave late-night visits a signature treat. The combination of endless hours and a frozen novelty beverage tied 7-Eleven directly into youth culture and everyday rituals. Grabbing a Slurpee after school, on a summer evening, or during an overnight outing built habits among customers who now saw the chain as part of their lifestyle, not just a fallback option. The product's timing was as important as its flavor. Without 24-hour schedules already in motion, the Slurpee might have remained a passing gimmick. Instead, it became a long-running symbol of the brand. Running a store without closing also demanded new systems behind the scenes. Night shifts had to be staffed, sometimes by a single clerk under heightened security. Delivery and restocking schedules were adjusted so that supplies could be managed while business never ceased. Companies had to think through safety procedures, lighting designs, and nightly routines that balanced convenience with control. These operational details weren't glamorous, but they mattered. Without redesigning the back end of the business to accommodate non-stop use, the cultural promise of always open would have collapsed under its own inefficiency. As the model stabilized, competitors began to imitate it. Gas stations extended their pumps into 24-hour service, often stocking snacks and essentials in small attached stores inspired by 7-Eleven's template. Diners experimented with round-the-clock tables, serving night shift workers as a reliable break spot. Pharmacies extended hours to handle late-night prescriptions. What had started with one spontaneous night after a football game spread into an assumption across towns and cities. At least one place in the neighborhood should be open no matter what time you needed it. The impact extended well beyond retail schedules. For workers in transportation, healthcare, and manufacturing, access to stores at off hours carried real weight. A nurse leaving the hospital at sunrise could pick up groceries without waiting. A trucker finishing a long stretch found food and supplies during the quietest hours. Suddenly, goods were available equally to people no matter what shift they worked. Retail had bent its schedule to fit customers' lives, and for the first time, time itself became part of the service. Of course, keeping stores running through the night exposed them to vulnerabilities. Theft and crime posed real threats, and profitability remained thin in certain locations. Detractors inside and outside the company argued that the gamble placed unnecessary pressure on staff and budgets. Yet every calculation kept leading to the same outcome. Reliability created loyalty that far outweighed those risks. People counted on 7-Eleven in ways competitors couldn't match, and that trust was its own form of profit. Looking back, it's striking to realize how much of today's consumer culture began with that accident. Without a small Dallas store keeping its lights on for football fans, 7-Eleven might have remained a regional shop with ordinary hours. Instead, its stores broke the link between shopping and the clock, shifting how consumers thought about access itself. Convenience no longer meant being close by. It meant being available whenever you needed something. Over time, that definition spread far and wide, shaping expectations not only for corner shops, but restaurants, supermarkets, pharmacies, and eventually digital businesses offering 24/7 online access. Today, the idea feels ordinary because it won, but it won because a company committed to an experiment most of its peers thought was wasteful. The gamble of always staying open changed how Americans lived daily life, then spread outward as other countries adopted the same expectations. It wasn't polished strategy or corporate vision that triggered the change. It was flexibility in the moment, and a willingness to let the outcome reshape the entire model. By the mid-20th century, 7-Eleven had succeeded in rewriting the rules of consumer access. But while the idea of 24/7 convenience feels like an American invention burned into neon lights, the next chapter of the company's story reveals a different driver altogether, one that would carry the brand far beyond its origins and into the worldwide dominance it enjoys today.